think we are live. Um, Hello and welcome to the Freedom Anarchist News Review. With me today I have Andy Meinker, famously of legal defence, varying different kinds over the years. We have a fairly full agenda which we'll probably go through at a rapid click tonight, including the Kneecap terror charge, which obviously is sorry, hang on a second, which is obviously a major attack on our right to free speech. Primarily, there is the fascist strike rallies, which took place and were not particularly successful, it seems, over the course of the weekend. We had the fining of Thames Water, a record £122 million. We have John McDonnell calling for grassroots challenge to Starmer. Some would say too little, too late, and how are you going to do that anyway? We have four more jailings of JSO people, and a late breaking story written by our very own Uri Gordon. We have the anarchists claiming responsibility for mass power outages in France. But to start for tonight, I will hand over to Andy to talk about some of the several legal cases which have been brought up, specifically starting with the terror charge against Kneecap.
Okay, so
what is going on?
One of Kneecap are charged with Section 13 of the Terrorism Act 2000, familiarly known as TACT, for Terrorism Act Century 20. A bizarre acronym, if ever there was one, and a bizarre offence. It is an offence to express support for a terrorist group. That's in Section 12. And it's has a maximum sentence of 15 years imprisonment, and you get a trial before a jury. And the government has sort of worked out that there are far too many people saying things that are supportive of Hamas or Hezbollah to possibly try to bring these, and that there's an extremely high chance that juries will let them off. Fortunately, there's Section 13, and Section 13 is wearing or displaying an item, in this case, a flag, that would arouse reasonable suspicion that you are showing support for a terrorist organization. So incredibly broad. They don't even have to prove the intent, just that that people might think so. And to make it certain that people will be convicted of it, it is a magistrates only offence. And by that I mean it can only be tried in the magistrates court. You won't get your local magistrates because they might actually have some independent opinions. All these cases are being sent to Westminster Magistrates Court, Wizzy Mags, as we call it in the trade. And it is heard by one of the senior district judges, which are professional judges who sit in place of the three lay magistrates, often by the chief metropolitan magistrate, who is the country's top magistrate, or their deputy, at least someone very experienced who knows how to give the right answer. Now, what's been happening so far, and we've had a few of those cases of people with various placards, some quite dodgily anti-Semitic, to be honest, and some on the more this is free speech, but Israel won't like it type something. So there's a bit of a spectrum here. But people have been convicted and then given a conditional discharge, i.e. the lowest possible penalty, and basically told to go away and nothing serious will happen, because they know that jailing people, the maximum sentence is 6 months in jail. You have no one in prison so far, and it's a sort of CPS, probably under government influence, picking a middle line between being seen to actually prosecute a few people and not actually stirring the pot by putting anyone in jail. Kneecap may be different. They may try to make a big example of this one, and a lot depends on what our guy from Kneecap turns around and says about what they've done.
He doesn't strike me as the most mealy-mouthed of people when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, we sort of wait and see how this one pans out. But it's it does seem bizarre that if you are saying that someone's a terrorist, that the worst that you're going to do to them is give them a slap on the wrist and some court costs and the £26 victim surcharge, because if that was the general penalty for terrorism, there'd be a damn sight more terrorists, so it does all look rather ridiculous, really.
So just to interrupt briefly, I have unfortunately a very short battery left on my laptop. So Uri has very kindly agreed to jump in
Here
at
I am.
very short notice. Uri, the news agenda is on your right, so you can work off that hopefully.
Okay, please stay with us until your battery does die.
I will try and get back on via my phone at some point when
Okay.
it does. But yes, we're just on the topic of Kneecap at the moment. The band rather than the
Or
disciplinary
part
action.
of the body, yes.
But yes, and Andy was talking about the legal end of it.
I mean, I think this is, a political question more than everything, because, the question is which laws and which speech laws are enforced and which are not. And, as we highlighted this morning, the levels of hate speech, the levels of incitement that are heard in far-right rallies in this country very often do cross the criminal threshold, but they are very much less often prosecuted. And I think that this is really kind of one of those cases where we really see the way in which the far right is, they're masters of projection. They're very often sort of, um, accusing others exactly of their own, of the phenomena that apply to them. And because this term two-tier policing, has been such a staple of far-right talk, this claim that, the left run rampant in the streets while, decent white people are prosecuted for daring to say, the racist things that they say. But in fact, we can see that the reality of two-tier policing is one whereby there is much more heavy-handed policing of the left. And this is now here with speech acts, with political expression, but we saw it, I think, much more starkly in the summer, where the fascist riots were allowed to take place without being preempted, causing injuries, causing lots of distress to communities. Whereas, in the immediate aftermath of that, it was the climate camp that was raided at the preparation stage, a completely non-violent event. And, I think that is the reality of two-tier policing in this country.
Yeah, we've just had the example of your Tory councillor's wife who got 31 months and had her sentence upheld by the Court of Appeal, which the Trump regime is moaning about. And that is, don't like to support the judges in this one, but it's a clear and blatant example of the religious and aggravated hate speech, the section 16 of the Public Order Act that she was charged with. But frankly, it could also have been done under the old Offences Against the Person Act 1861 for inciting people to commit murder, which is an even more serious offence. And so, in fact, she's gone off bloody lightly for what actually he said. So there have been laws for a very long time about telling people to kill others. They just don't seem to be applied when in all the situations that the far right use them.
This whole conceit about the consistency of the law has never really rung even vaguely true, right? You can sort of see this whenever the monarchy does anything particularly spectacular, and Republic show up and they do their protest, and some of them get hauled away. Or obviously, was it the Queen's Jubilee when there was a class war protest and everyone got pinched for the daring rule breaking of waving a banner kind of thing?
I mean, somebody waved an empty piece of paper, right, at the outside the coronation and was nabbed for it, just for an empty piece of paper.
Yep.
It's a notable thing that obviously you get the likes of Putin, Putin's Russia. You have people being arrested for blank sheets of paper, and it's presented as this kind of outrage against every possible vision of democracy you can have. It's, obviously an autocratic regime that arrests people for blank pieces of paper. It's like, is this terribly different in that sense? I mean, obviously, what happens to people afterwards is, but the sentiment of arresting people for the lack of or the message that is a lack of message is right there. It's exactly the same basic principle.
I mean, I think that, it should be pointed out, like, Hezbollah is by no means a nice organization, by no means an ally of anyone on the left. Yeah, it's a misogynistic, theocratic group that is also, dominating Lebanese politics in an oppressive way. But I think that, even if we, as anarchists, would not support, waving the flag of any hierarchical military-style organization that is, has parliamentarians in a state parliament and is sort of this kind of mini-state within a state. Nevertheless, it is up to us to stand in solidarity with people who are being prosecuted for the mere allegation of waving that flag, especially when the situation is so imbalanced when it comes to the far right. And again, like James Horton wrote in the article this morning, the answer is not to demand that the far right also is subject to an equal amount of repression for speech acts, nor is it to claim that, things should be a free for all, and that, we would be accepting people saying anything they want, right? For us, it's always about that longer term solution, about social transformation and end to racism and end to social class, because we can't really provide, a policy framework within the existing structures that would say anything about it.
As a brief aside before probably moving on, it is probably worth noting how quiet the likes of the Free Speech Union and Spiked and all of the heavy going free speech campaigning groups on the right. They don't seem to care about this end of things, which some might say is a more important argument than whether you get a platform on a university debate club. You're not getting arrested. If you're not getting arrested, then is it as important? But anyway, moving on. Speaking of two-tier policing, we have fascists and their strike rallies. And this is a supposedly nationwide rally, which was more or less successful in a handful of places, I think it's fair to say. Norwich, apparently, they did relatively well. You had not a particularly great turnout in Glasgow, where there were, which for a major city, obviously. And the subject of our particular story this week, which was a councillor who was down in Cornwall, who was indulging a bit of old-fashioned Holocaust denial.
I mean, this was really more blatant than I've heard in the public sphere in a long time,
Yeah.
on the level of repeating things that, world Jewry declared war on Germany. It's not anti-Semitism because Jews aren't really Semitic. The revisionist historians and the numbers. I mean, and again, like this is what I was referring to in terms of things that, in this country, as far as I understand, can be construed as crossing the criminal threshold. And by a publicly elected official as well. I mean, there is, and it's although at the same time, what the same report also noted that, if they weren't draped in Union Jacks, it would just be like this congregation of people milling about, right? There was some, it seems that, the Fash have sort of two modes. One is just sort of milling about and being really sad, and the other is like running riot and hurting people and causing injuries and attacking minorities and so on. Well, I guess Farage and Reform UK conferences try to be somewhere in the middle between the two, but well, they never quite manage, do they?
I mean, this one was very much on the of the two modes. Obviously, the milling about one is them not really being very good at doing a kind of a mass participation. It's available to all kind of rally, and I think one of the major chants they were doing was something like "not far right, right so far" or something, which catchy, fine, but the problem that they've got, obviously, is that the people who show up to these things uh, are freaks. They're just super weird people, right? Like they show up and they say Kyle, or they go into these anti-Semitic rants, or they're sort of gabbling on about migration and all the rest of it, and it's off-putting to like. I think there is a big disconnect between the rise of Reform, a party of partly of protest and partly which has gathered in these elements from the far right, and what real normal people actually are prepared to stand around and be part of, I suppose. In the same way as when we've got and I love our Black Bloc comrades, but when you have a Black Bloc show up apropos of nothing to a major event, it can be quite off-putting to some people, because you're out there with your kids and your stroller, and there's some people who you don't really know, and they're all masked up, and they can turn out to be really nice people, but it's a little surprising and off-putting, right?
There goes Simon Battery. And I think that I think that leaves us to Andy to keep discussing this. But I mean, on the one hand, it seems that Reform is taking away most of its power from the Conservatives rather than from Labour. On the other hand, it appears that, Labour is behaving as if it's its own voter base that's being threatened by Reform and doing everything to sort of hand over the middle ground to the far right. How do we even explain that? I mean, except for, the awful incompetence of them even as Machiavellian politicians.
Um, there is a thing that we had previously with New Labour, in the Blair years, is the assumption that your left vote has got nowhere to go, and therefore everything should be angled at pulling people to the right. And that does not seem to me to be the situation now for Labour, because there is no amount of how far right they can go that will get the people who are genuinely interested in reform to choose Labour over reform, but they are very likely to lead a lot of people who are left leaning to the Greens. To Simon may bring this up later on the idea of some new left party, um, or even to the Liberal Democrats, just on the fact that they've got more of a social conscience than Labour are willing to show.
Well,
And
yeah,
the
I mean, and
difficulty with
we saw that already in the local elections to a degree, where Lib Dem have been gaining from Labour on the back of their pandering to the right.
yeah,
And of
there's
course, the question is where that leaves us as the extra parliamentary left.
that's that's a difficult one. And the you keep bashing away with real politics, I think is the pat answer to that. Because there is a way to explain to working class people that the real enemy is the ruling class, and that nationalism is a dupe and a con to try to put working people in different races and countries against each other, um, and that requires a certain amount of political courage that the Labour leadership doesn't have, partly because of their own prejudice, but also their opinion that basically working class people are stupid and there to be manipulated and have to be spoon fed easy answers rather than having proper politics explained.
Yeah, I mean, it looks often like Labour have uh, as much contempt for their own electorate as the Conservatives have for them. Um, and well, I guess that's not a big shock for us with
Mm.
what we know about party machineries and the kind of people that they raise to the surface, or about the history of the Labour Party as to a degree, an organization founded to sap the political energy of the working class movement in this country. But I mean, we've been into this topic previously as well. It just seems, even on the most calculating level of political machinations, to be this absolute shot in the foot.
Yeah,
Um, and it's something that continues to baffle me, in the same way, I guess, that I mean, ultimately it probably boils down structurally to Labor being beholden to the owning class, and to their financiers, the way that many political parties are, um, and mirroring, you know, the situation of the Democrats in the States, and the situation of a lot of social democratic, or formerly social democratic turned neoliberal parties in the West. Maybe we should then move from this kind of despairing discussion of parliamentary politics to some other interesting news, or views, actually, for us. I mean, we've had a discussion of Labour's housing policy, also on our pages recently, and I think that's a topic that's worth detaining ourselves on, because once again, this sort of mismatch between problem and solution, this obsession with quantitative aspects. We need to build more, but for whom? This sort of pattern that Labor is promoting often has to do with these sort of satellite pop. And so all it's actually doing is contributing to the rise in housing prices rather than to people actually getting roofs over their heads. Simon, maybe you'd like to comment. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one so if you kind of look at the way in which economy, sort of certainly Britain, but also very notably in places like Italy and Japan and Germany, you have what in the UK has been a sort of a movement away from various different places, right? So you've got failing or kind of struggling cities, particularly in the north, in Cornwall and in Wales, where they aren't able to compete against the great cities. So Birmingham and Manchester and Liverpool and Newcastle to a degree, and obviously London, they suck people in from these less successful towns and cities because essentially within capitalism, everything being a competition, cities and towns compete with each other for industry, for useful labor, for investment, etc., right? And the problem that capitalism has in providing housing under those circumstances is that the housing is chasing this movement of people. It's chasing essentially internal migration. And there's no real way to suddenly provide vast additional amounts of extra housing space in all of these places, right? So London is already very heavily built on. It's got a very limited amount of brownfield and green space left. So you get Sadiq Khan, for example, in his sort of desperation to find a way to increase the building. He's saying, well, let's build on the greenfield sites. But the problem is that these greenfield sites, they're not doing any kind of holistic building program, which would provide these houses alongside all of the amenities that you need. You need NHS outlets, dentistry. You need places for the kids to go. You need, all of the electricity and gas, and water and roads. You need bus services and all of this stuff. You need this kind of piled into all of these new communities. But developers aren't prepared to pay for those things, and you can only extract so much from them before they say, well, this isn't really financially viable for us. There's too much red tape. We don't want to build in these places. So what you end up with is, you get a logjam of where developers want to build for maximized profits, and where landlords and rentiers want places to be so that they can have these monopolies of land use. And none of this is touched by just saying, go ahead and build, when it comes to the provision of what people actually need and where they need to be at all. Like, none of this is for people, it's for profits. And this is a process that's been going on for 40, 50 years now, right? So that breaks the vast majority of the labour movement and left thinking and Keynesianism, starts flocking off all the council houses, and has created a situation in which, there's some planning, authority related stuff, which makes it more difficult to build sometimes. You do get NIMBYs, but mostly actually only rich people have the wherewithal to impose those rules. But it's a mess, and Labour is simply kind of waving their hands and saying, oh, well, we'll just give the developers the go ahead. Doesn't touch any of this stuff in a way which is in any way useful, I suppose.
At this point, I'm going to excuse myself as well. If you're stable again on your connection, Simon, and
I am on a phone.
Let you guys, continue this conversation to its end. All right. Good night.
Okay. Actually, I don't know whether I'll be able to host from here.
Okay, shall I say something while you're just trying to host the thing?
I think I'm okay. I need to find out what's on the thing. I think yes.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lack of long-term strategic planning, which is our ever-returning critique of capitalism, is that they can't plan for a long-term thing because everyone's looking at the next election. And that is a situation that seems to have got worse in the 50-year period since the 70s that we've been looking at. And even if a sensible program of house building and the infrastructure that goes with it was started now, you've got a very long, long way to go. And that will hopefully lead us nicely into Thames Water, which is
that's a good
an
link.
example of infrastructure that has been left to for 100 odd years, assuming that the Victorians did a decent job building the sewers in the 1860s.
I mean, in fairness,
and we just hope it'll hold together for a bit longer. And so they get a fine, I believe. Quite a big fine.
122 million quid, yeah.
Now, there is another even older quote from Baron Thurlow in the 18th century that says, "How do you expect a corporation to have a conscience when it's got no soul to be damned and no body to be kicked?" And fines don't seem to work very well because the actual chief executives and directors don't end up paying them. You don't find them under the arches or sleeping in Hyde Park in the tent camp after this massive fine. There is the possibility that that jailing them might be work, much as I'm for prison abolition. But the whole concept of fining companies that not got enough money for proper investment seems to be ludicrous. Do we know where the money is going to go? I assume it goes straight into the government coffers.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, I suppose the other question is where it comes from. I mean, in terms of like, so one of the things with Thames Water, I think, that is noteworthy is that in terms of its bank balance, it is in trouble. Like, there's no two ways about it. Thames Water out of money, and either it ends up being nationalised, in which case this fine essentially is written off, presumably because it's the government fining itself, or it's just another thing to bung on the price tag for the consumer. I mean, the problem is, of course, that we aren't really consumers, in as much as it's a utility. We don't really have a choice. You know, I can't live without a running tap. It's not a thing I can do. I'm not consuming like I would buy a pair of jeans. It's a complete fallacy to suggest this is in any way something which we get to choose. So it's, I think I think the interesting thing about Thames Water and kind of the whole water utilities situation is how starkly it shows how much of this is essentially just made up. Like, just completely, you know, water is sort of provided, but most of the actual process of it is a complete mess. But nobody's being made to take responsibility for it. It just sort of happens in the ether somewhere, and then somewhere down the line we're told, oh, actually, well, you know, you need to pay X amount of additional money. And there's no mechanism really for justice to be done. I mean, as you say, like, none of these people seem to be going to jail. There's no serious sanctions being done to any of them. None of them are having their mansions taken away or even their bonuses for the most part. They get to sail away into the distance on their nice yachts, and they do all have yachts.
Yeah,
it's an interesting one. Like the Take Back Water is the campaigning group that's attempting to organise a big boycott, essentially, of paying for this stuff, which is the only real thing that the general public can do, because there's no way on earth, it appears, that Labour is ever going to be leveraged through the ballot box to take the kinds of more, I mean, it's not an extreme action as such, just something resembling natural justice, I suppose. And I can't see that.
I suppose this is time for a quick reminder that if you can't pay your water bills, they can't actually cut your water off if it's a domestic premises. So if you are thinking about having a pause in your payments, unlike things like electricity, where there's a specific offence of abstracting electricity that you haven't paid for, water, it's just a civil debt, and they are not allowed to do it for public health reasons, because if you don't have running water, then it tends to have a knock-on effect to the whole community, which is one of the reasons why the Victorians built a functioning sewer system in the first place.
Right, so I think we had two other bits and pieces that I can remember, because obviously my laptop having gone down. One of which was the jailing of 4 more JSO people and any related activist legal shenanigans going on. And the other one being, sorry, you go.
To do that one quickly, bless Indigo. I knew her when she used to meet at Lark, and for people wide around, it's the London Action Resource Centre that's just down the road from Freedom. And we sadly had to kick them out after they got the place raided for one of their highly accountable actions, where the cops caught them wandering out of the building with a load of D-locks in their rucksacks at 11:30 at night. And the cops unsurprisingly exercised their powers under Section 32 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act to search the building where the people that they had arrested had just been in. And I sat there patiently at the next LARC meeting saying, look, you can't announce that you're going to break the law and expect to use people's buildings, because that gets us raided and everybody's stuff stolen and trashed by the cops. The cops naturally managed to rummage through the spare underwear drawer that we kept for support of local sex workers, because they've just got dirty minds. But intrusive sort of stuff we just couldn't have happening at a social centre. And this is where, unfortunately, this open, accountable, and we're going to fill the jails attitudes gets you in the end. It's not a very, it's very sad to see a lot of well-meaning people ending up on the wrong end, but we told them it was bloody going to happen. So it's very sad.
I mean,
I wish them well, but
hopefully I have to say the overall strategy, or when they first started doing it, I assumed that the way in which the state would essentially neutralize them would be A, string them along for years with court cases and that kind of happen, but B, just whack them with an enormous fine, because that means you can't be a martyr and you're not going to overload the jails. It surprised me when the Tories brought in the legislation which led to so many of them being jailed, and you now see obviously the Labour Party bafflingly refusing to withdraw this legislation, even though the prison crisis means that they are letting people out left, right, and centre because there's not enough places in the jails. And it was sort of so you took a law which didn't prioritise jailing people and was very effective in putting people off from breaking the law because of the way it was set up, and you replaced it with one which, by the time people come out, they're going to be more liable to break the law again, because you've broken that seal for them, so to speak, and they've already got the stigma from having been in jail, and they no longer have necessarily the fear of the unknown when going back to jail. And you've also just filled your jails with additional people. It seems barking. I don't understand the logic behind it at all from a state strategy perspective.
There is one thing that the state is notoriously reluctant to go into asset seizing. Extinction Rebellion had a huge amount in the bank, raised incredibly publicly. I too was expecting that to be seized under all manner of proceeds of crime legislation or in confiscation orders afterwards. And no, that was allowed to just carry on. But again, it's the hang the ringleaders and pardon the majority, so that what we've had is the Extinction Rebellion's large-scale demonstrations whittled down to a hardcore of people who have carried on with JSO, many of whom have ended up in jail, while the vast majority of participants in the early demonstrations have been put off by the low-level, long court cases in the magistrates and so forth. And that is a successful strategy in the sense that the state is afraid of mass movements. They are not, in the end of the day, afraid of small amounts of people doing spectacular things, because they know that that does not lead to the danger of real societal change.
Cool. Which is a good way to bring us on to our last bit, which I do not have to hand, but it's an article which went up a mere hour ago, which is that French anarchists or French activists have claimed a significant disruption of the French railway network. I would urge people to go and read that, because it's fairly spectacular goings on. But it is an example of the other end of that stuff, where small groups taking direct action can have a big impact. So on which slightly more optimistic note, I think we can probably call it a day there. Also, because my phone is also about to run out of battery. Clearly, my battery management has not been great today. Thank you very much, Andy, for turning out, and I will thank Uri and apologise to his partner for dragging him away from dinner. Thank you, everyone, for listening and indeed putting up with this slightly shambolic episode. And hope you have a great week.